And look who's coming up.
You know, it was a team that you saw them develop more and more as the year went on. You have Igor Shistrken in net. You can do a lot of stuff. So I think looking at the roster and looking at what happened this offseason, the Islanders really made no moves. Like, there's nothing that you can say the Islanders did that improved that hockey team from where they were last year, and they weren't a playoff team last year. And, you know, they had a lot of injuries, and, you know, maybe you can say getting guys back from injuries is a plus, but, I mean, they really had nothing. I think both those teams were in the Johnny Hockey sweepstakes. I think both of them put a lot into that. And but the Devils came out with Palat, which I thought was a huge pickup for them. A guy that can play both zones, has Stanley Cup experience, you know, can come into that locker room that has a ton of young players like Jack Hughes, who I think is just ready for stardom. If they get any type of goaltending, and I think they shored up some of those issues. You know, I think the Devils had 8 different goalies last year. So between Blackwood being healthy this year and bringing in Vitek Vanecek there in the net, I think that was their major issue. And you look at the blue line, I mean, Dougie Hamilton, hopefully for them, isn't injured for most of the year. Obviously, he was a huge signing 2 years ago. I think PK is probably, you know, the one big guy who left, and you can actually say maybe that's maybe an addition by subtraction for some Devils fans. But, you know, Jesper Bratt is a very good player, really underrated player. I like the Devils team overall. I hate to say it. I think they're a good young team. And when I look at the Islanders, I see guys like Zach Parise, who they're hoping is going to play top 6 minutes. It doesn't really appeal to me. So I would go Rangers, Devils, Islanders if you had the power rank the 3 of them. But I hope there's a pretty vast difference between the 1 and the 2 and 3 teams.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm kind of perplexed by what the Islanders didn't do this year. I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, they maybe thought they were getting Johnny Gaudreau and then there'd be something after that. But, you know, even from like the Bodie Wild situation where the NHL's like, yeah, this guy can come back and lose, like, no, I don't know. So the Islanders perplex me a lot. It's like they just
even the firing of Lou. Firing of Lou started off. I was like, why are they? Yeah. You know, what are they doing? You know, not firing of Lou, firing of Trot. I like Lou firing of Trot. I was like, what is going on there? So, and there was never a reason given for that. And they keep on harping on, oh, they were injured. Like, this team is set to go. If you thought it was just injuries and this team is set to go, then why'd you fire the head coach? That's my whole thought process behind it. And you bring in a guy who has, you know, basically coached under him for so long. It's the same same system, same everything. So very weird, very odd.
Yeah, I didn't get it. Watching from afar, I thought certainly that they were going to make a few moves. And when they didn't, I was like, okay, well, that's their prerogative, I guess. But it's bizarre. Okay, so let's talk about this Ranger team. And you brought up a guy that I think is going to get overlooked. And for fantasy poolies, Igor Shistrken, I think, is a steal. I still think people don't realize how good this guy is going to be. And I think he's like top 2, top 3 goalies in the league. And I don't think he gets enough credit.
Yeah, I think when I look at my own fantasy league, people, he's kind of falling to that late second to almost a third round pick now, which is kind of crazy when you look at his numbers and everything. Obviously, Vasilevsky, you can say, is still a top dog. You know, you think he's like older, but he's not. He's like, what, 28, 29? So it's like he's been around forever. He's been so good for the last, 8 years. But when you look at Igor, you get playing in a division where I think there's not, like, we play the Islanders, like, not too many goal scorers there. Yeah, I think a lot of those teams, like, he's not going to let more than 3 goals a game. If that, you see the goals allowed was 2.10 last year. His save percentage is ridiculous. He faces a lot of shots. I just think this Rangers defense is very improved from last season. You could say, it's the same guys, but you have Braden Schneider, who came in halfway through the year last year, was a rookie, played very well for them down the stretch, played very well in the playoffs. He now has that whole new experience of that year under his belt. The guy on the Rangers who I think is going to make the biggest jump this year is Keandre Miller. He is going to turn into a superstar. Buy your Keandre Miller stock now and I've been harping on it for the Rangers, to re-sign him now, because his cost is going to go up more and more every day. This guy looks phenomenal in the preseason. He was their best defenseman, including Adam Fox, last year in the playoffs at some points. Obviously, they have Adam Fox back, who's just a point machine, unbelievable. Will run the power play for them again this year. Ryan Bensman, Jacob Trouba, other than just making every single fan base hate him with his hits, obviously turned into the best season as a Ranger, was named captain this year. I think that's going to do great for his confidence. But I think Keandre Miller and Braden Schneider make that defense so good. And then Zach Jones should be the guy in the 6th spot. Lieber Hayek is the other guy who's kind of going at it with him. Hayek's been in the organization for a few years now. He was in the Ryan McDonough trade. He's the last piece of the McDonough trade still active in the Rangers organization. If you could believe that, Ryan McDonough and JT Miller trade, which Ranger fans just shake their head at now. But Hayek's the last guy from that. They're kind of holding on to him for dear life, trying to get his game going. But I think it's going to be Zach Jones. Basically, is Adam Fox light, 5'10" guy, plays extremely well on the power play, very good offensive player, had a very good college career at UMass. I think that when you look at the Rangers overall, the add Trocheck up front, who I think is an upgrade over Ryan Strome. They're really missing maybe that first line guy. Lafreniere looks like he might be the guy up front, but they might keep the kid lines together of Hedel and Kakko and Lafreniere, which kind of was like the big thing during the playoffs. So everyone loved that line. They were kind of the energy line for the Rangers. So they're going to be looking at a guy like you have Sammy Blais on your team. He's a guy who's going to get maybe the first look at that first line. Returning from a knee injury last year, had some offensive output with St. Louis, but a guy who really needs to prove himself. Barclay Goodrow could see some time there, had a solid first season for the Rangers. And, they're going to kind of rotate those guys and then maybe play some of the kids up top. But they really want to keep Vitaly Kravtsov on that second line with Artemi Panarin and Vincent and Trocheck. But Kravtsov, again, has not proved himself at the NHL level yet. This is his 3rd stint with the Rangers, gone back and forth to Russia. So this is it. This is his last chance. This is their last hurrah trying to make that marriage work. And who knows what happens there. So there are some question marks for the Rangers up front. And really, after Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, and Trocheck, those big 4, where's the rest of your scoring coming from? And it's got to be those kids. And, between the 4 of them, I think Lafreniere is the one guy who's going to step up this year. Had a great playoff. Hedel had a good playoff too, but Lafreniere looks bigger and faster than last season right in the preseason. I can see him scoring 25 to 30 goals this season. If he gets some top Kreider, he's saying that, him and Kreider are working after practice. He's working on, more dirty goals up front. And I think the thing with Lafreniere is that a lot of people kind of wanted him to be Sidney Crosby immediately came to the NHL.
Yeah.
He comes from the same province. He kind of has that, he was the 1-1 pick for years and years. And then he kind of came in during COVID, got thrown right into the fire as an 18-year-old, didn't have a great rookie season, and everyone kind of wrote him off. He's 20 years old now. He's put on something like 15 pounds since his rookie season. He's gotten faster. He's gotten stronger. And he kind of played with that kind of snarly edge to him in the playoffs. And I think that really speaks to Gerard Gallant because Gallant kind of preached that a little bit with him. And that's how Gallant played as a player as well. And Gallant kind of said he saw a little bit of himself in Lafreniere, which I think would be huge for the Rangers. If he can kind of get a little bit of a nasty side to him, kind of crash the net a little bit. We play with a guy with Filipino who's more of a skill player. If Lafreniere can go to the corners and get the puck out and get it going for Hedel and Kakko, I think that's huge. But I think he's the guy to watch up front to have the breakout. And then Kravtsov is kind of like the, who knows he's going to be. If he can score 15 to 20 goals, that's a huge plus for the Rangers. If not, you got to look at the trade deadline and see what they can bring in. Like last year, Chris Drury hit every single trade right on the nose of who he brought in to kind of help the team out. A lot of those guys all those guys are gone now. So we'll see. Obviously, the name Patrick Kane is continue to float around New York. They don't have the cap space for him right now. Come trade deadline time, if he's not dealt to Edmonton or somewhere else before then, the Rangers could be in play there for him if that top line forward is not working out. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting. The Rangers have 17 forwards still in camp. I think they're only going to keep 13 of them, so it's going to be a major decision of who sticks around and who doesn't. Guys like Ryan Reeves could be on the chopping block there. Julian Gautier, former first-round pick of the Canes, who they acquired a couple years ago, guy who just hasn't really gotten it going yet. He could be a guy who could possibly be moved out. Ryan Carpenter was just brought in. He's a guy who's a major question mark if he's going to make this team. First two preseason games, he's had some big-time turnovers. And then Jimmy Vesey's back from the dead. Former the Jimmy Vesey sweepstakes the Rangers won years ago. He's back after playing for the Devils last year, and he's been probably one of their best forwards this preseason so far. So he's a guy who's making it very hard on the Rangers to make the choice if they're going to keep him or a guy like Drayton Hunt, who had an okay year last year in his first year with the Rangers. So it's very interesting there, and then obviously on defense, like I said, it's probably be Zach Jones or Libor Hayek as their 6th and 7th defenseman. And in net, you have Igor, but Yaroslav Halak comes in for Alexander Georgiev, who got shipped out to Denver because the Rangers couldn't afford him anymore. And, I honestly think it might be an upgrade for the Rangers because Georgiev, as good as he was when he started, wasn't a great backup, wasn't good in spot starts. And Halak got some experience out last year out in Vancouver, backing up Demko, who obviously got super hot at the end of the year. So Halak looked for another place to go. Ended up with the Rangers, and he's a Rangers killer. I mean, every time they played him with the Islanders, he would beat them. So his record at MSG is ridiculous. So let's hope he does some good in the blue jersey this time.
You don't realize when you hear some of the Rangers and even last year with like a guy like Ryan Strome, but you don't realize how many young players they still have. Like, it's been an impressive retool on the fly with, bringing in Panarin, free agency, and then bringing these kids along. The thing I look at is, you mentioned Lafreniere is probably going to get the first look. You got Capco, you got Cheadle, you got Dryden Hunt, as you mentioned. Not all of these guys are going to hit on all the time, so it's going to be a bit of a revolving door. And I wonder if some of these guys who maybe haven't taken that step forward get dealt at the trade deadline to bring somebody in, whoever maybe hasn't taken that big step but still has some of that potential. I wonder if a guy like Capo Caco is a candidate for that near the trade deadline. Yeah,
definitely. I thought Niels Lundqvist was going to be that guy before he decided he didn't want to come to training camp and wanted to go somewhere else. I thought he was going to be the guy that could possibly move for a top 6 forward up front. They got a first-round pick out of him in a very good draft coming up this next season. As you know, with all your scouting shows and everything else you do there, it's a very good 2023 draft. So Rangers now own 2 first-round picks. That's a huge currency right now for next year. Now, I think the only problem for the Rangers is not the picks or the depth of the team. It's going to be the salary cap. And I think a guy like Ryan Reeves, who I think is making 1.75 right now for this season, he could be the odd man out just based off of cap space. And if they get rid of Reeves, if Reeves somehow does not make it, would be crazy to think because of the leadership that he provided last year and how highly the team talks about him and everything else. It'll be very tough to see if they do release him or what they end up doing with him. I believe he'll make the team, but if you do release him, they'll have about $2 million in cap going into the season. By the time you get to the trade deadline, when you accrue all that cap space, that you'll be close to around $4 or $5 million in cap space, which then can you turn into a Patrick Kane or a big time scorer, whatever team falls off the map by then. So that could be a guy to play around with if he could possibly be in a deal. And then the other guy to watch, I know he's got a long-term deal with Barclay Goodrow, could be a guy even this offseason that the Rangers could look to, because they have to re-sign Keandre Miller and Lafreniere. They're all coming up on their deals coming up. So, a guy like Ryan Lindgren, who I think Ranger fans have fallen in love with, he could be a guy. Barclay Goodrow could be a guy. They're going to have to get rid of at least one of these young, quote-unquote, veterans that they're going to have to make space for someone. So it's going to be interesting to see. As much as the window for the Rangers is wide open right now, it's also very tight based off of the salary cap the next 2 years being stagnant. They got to get to 2025. They got to get to that $5 million increase. And then you can the Panarin contract is really big, which is, I think, the issue. And then they gave the big deal to Trouba, which I think, looking back on it, if they knew what Keandre Miller was going to turn into, maybe they wouldn't have done that deal. But, they're going to have to move one of these veterans out because the cap is slowly closing in on them. And all these young talent, all these young kids got to get paid eventually. And unfortunately, you got to win with these guys on entry-level deals, so you got to do the next 2 years.
Yeah, entry-level deals are all the rage. Kyle Hall is joining us. He is the host of the Broadway Hat Podcast. I love when I have other podcasters on the show because the sound is so good, and your sound is incredible. But one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because you helped out the UFHL quite a lot, especially when I was doing head of baseball, and you chipped in this year with your power rankings. And I love seeing power rankings because there are some people that get really wild. Like, I'm looking at where you have us, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much fine. I'm good with that. What I want is to under-promise and over-deliver as a GM. So I like being 25 because that gives us lots of room to grow. But tell me how you settled on Red Army at number 1. I'm not saying I disagree with you with your choice, but how'd you settle on them as number 1 and Titans 2 and Gators? Go through the list.
You know, it's funny. When I was doing your team last year, I was looking at my rankings from last year, and I was like, I had you last year. And,
yeah, so did I.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we talked before I even did it, so I had some inside information on what was going on there, and I was like, all right, I think they might be last. And then that came to fruition. But then you kind of, I've watched your team build, and I'm like, you know what? They're putting together a very good team here, slowly but surely. I think I like your goaltending. I like some of the moves up front, so you had to get bumped up in the rankings. But yeah, I love Red Army's team. I talked about Igor Shistrken. I think Vasilevsky and him are the 1-2 punch there in goal. I love that team. I think they're loaded on the top 9. I think they have a really good top 4. I'm a big fan of that roster, and I was waiting for them last year. I was just waiting for them to break out last year. It was the one team that I kept on coming back to every week. How they doing? Where they going? Because you got Kaprizov, Hughes, and Kyle Connor up front. I mean, they can score 45 to 50 goals, each of those guys. And then I'm on board with Lafreniere having a big year. Zegras, I know he got a little banged up in the preseason. I'm sure he'll be fine. Yeah, I think he's a kid. Yeah, he's a kid who's going to break out. Obviously, the NHL's trying to make him the face of the league right now. Like, they are trying their hardest to do that, which is great, especially because he's a West Coast, on the West Coast, grow the game, blah, blah. That's great. Lucas Raymond, I like him a lot too. All those guys can be 30-goal scorers, and that's your second line. So, and then you got Nyquist and then Matty Beniers, who I think is going to play a ton out in Seattle. Already looks good in the preseason. And Lankinen, I just love their top 9. And Max Domi, I think for a team in Chicago, which could fall apart very quickly, he could see some big-time minutes this year. Or build up some stock and get traded to a contender at the end. So I just like Domi there in the 4th line. And yeah, Quinn Hughes, I think he's in, obviously the second half, the Hughes brothers there. I think he's such a good player. Bynum's a good player. Draisaitl is good. Cam Fowler has been solid for years. And Shesterkin and net. I mean, it's a very well-built team. The Titans, I like their top 12. I like their whole forward unit. They traded Vasilevsky, and you're like, when I saw the trade come out, I was like, what are they doing? And you look at Ottinger there. So I'm like, oh, crap, I forgot they had Ottinger. So, and I think he's going to be he's a guy who I watched. I covered the World Juniors, the World Championships 2 years ago, and he was the Team USA goaltender. And it was the first time I really watched him because he was more in a backup role in Dallas. He was actually playing the American Hockey League most of the year, and I was watching him, and I was like, this guy is going to be phenomenal. And it led Team USA. They almost got to the gold medal game. They lost in the semis. They won the bronze. And I was watching, and I was like, this guy is going to be – and I talked to a couple guys that play with him, and they're like, he's the next level. So I was like, he's a guy who I wish you could buy stock in players, like, because he's a guy who I knew about early, and I was like, just watch. And I would tell everyone, just watch this guy. He's going to be so good. He's going to be so good. And sure enough, he proved me right in the playoffs last year, being just an unbelievable playoff. So I like the Titans. Gators, I think I've been high on them forever. I like their team. Like, I don't know. Anytime you got McKinnon, you have a chance to win. So, McKinnon, JT Miller, and Claude Giroux. And I think Giroux's going to have a really good season back in Ottawa. I like their decor. And Markstrom had a phenomenal year last year. When we were doing the UFHL Now show every week, I felt like we were making him, the goaltender of the week. I think he wanted the most of any other goalie. So as good as Vasilevsky and Igor were last year, obviously Igor had one of the best goaltending seasons ever, when you look at the stats. But Markstrom, he would put these weeks together where it was like, 3 games, 2 shutouts, and a 6-7, goals allowed. And it's like, okay, he might have a 4-goal game. We played Edmonton, he'll have 7. But, the rest of the games, he was phenomenal. So I think, they're really good. And then, Dynasty, I think they're a very well put together team. Another team who I think was a little bit of a disappointment last year. I'm looking for them to bounce back this year. And the Royals, They've been really good. They have a great team, and I kind of wanted to make sure they're in my top 5 because of the success they've had. And they have a really good top 6 that can score at will. And then look at the rest of my top. The one team that's tough to keep up with is Bentley Jacks because they make a trade every other day.
I know.
So I mean, that was again putting the show together. It was like who had trades this week. I was on the Bentley Jacks roster and seeing who's changed. So. Bentley Jacks, I think they'll continue to move and shake during the season, so who knows what they'll turn into. But I like the Grizzlies. I like Can West. I like the guys who own Can West, so I like to put them in the top 10. Ice Vikings, very good team, came on late last year. I thought they could have won the playoffs. I thought they were my one team to watch there. One team I have to say I misranked, and I got to apologize, is Outlaws. They're a team who I had at 18 originally, and they got moved down my final ranking. But I like the Outlaws team, and I have to shout them out. I like them. I underranked you. I was looking at it again this morning, and I was like, "Crap!" I had them up at 18, and they somehow moved down. I don't know how I did it, but there's a lot of moving parts to this thing when you start building it out. But I have to say, the Outlaws, I do like their roster. I think they have. Obviously they were going back and forth with Bentley Jacks everyone last year to get into the playoffs. I like their team. They got Panarin. Obviously, I think he's got a better year this year than last year. When you think about it, how crazy, people say Panarin had a down year last year. Guy still had 90 points. He wasn't scoring goals. So he wasn't scoring goals, but he was getting assists. He was getting 3 or 4 assists a game sometimes for a week. So I think he's going to have a better scoring year this year, Panarin. He's already said he's going to shoot more this year. He said he's going to, quote-unquote, do more dumb stuff on the blue line. He's not – so, I think he kind of played a little bit reserved towards the end of the season. So when he gets back into doing his crazy stuff, that's when he's at his best. But I like Outlaws. There's some teams that – I'm not going to call them out, but you look at the moves they made this offseason, you're like, I don't know if I would have done that move. But, there's some teams there. You can probably tell from some of the rankings there in the bottom, the teams I wasn't a big fan of. But – I think a team like the Brutes. I think the Brutes had a good close to the season last year. I think they're going to be a solid team. Yetis, same thing. I like the Godfathers. I like some of the moves they made, not only in season last year, but some of the roster in general. West Coast Express. I think they're a team that can probably move up a little more too. I think when I was looking at the rankings, I thought they were going to be kind of like in that, 12 to 16, 17 range. So I think they're a team that can move up a little bit. Rock Republic, another team who, for some reason, I don't really love their roster, but they deliver. So, that's a team who I'm sure will outperform where I rank them. I like my top 10. To be honest with you, I like the top 3. I really like those teams. The Royals, I think, again, could be right there again, but I love Red Army. I think Titans are really solid. Gators are solid. When you look at the whole league in general, I think there's 20 teams that you can say right now, like, if they show me that roster, like, yeah, that's a team that can make a playoff run, like that, which is great. I think that's great. So, there's some teams that I fall in love with, and there's some teams that I kind of like, I just don't like this guy in general, and that's like a top line player, and I just move on from them. So
that's right.
So it's funny, but it's tough critiquing because, there's so much time and effort. And that's something I really learned with this league is there's so much time and effort put in by all these managers and all these GMs and owners. And it's crazy. And that's what I really enjoyed when I was doing the show, talking to people and having them on the show. This is your baby. It's like, and that they're like to rank someone's kid, I guess, tough.
Yeah.
That's tough. And then like you said, like someone like, will read this, and I like a lot of these owners. Like I become friendly with a lot of these owners, so it's very tough. Like I love the North Star guys. Like for me to rank them 27, it hurt.
Yeah,
I really
were busy.
them.
Like they made trades every day. They took over from the Bentley Jacks with the amount of trades they made.
And I really like those guys. So like, I had them closer to the bottom last year, so I'm like, I'm putting them up. Like kind of like I'm putting them up a little higher. So I like those guys. They're very nice there. So they've always been good to me. So I was like. I gotta try to put them up, but I don't know when to put them too up high. So it's tough, but it's the league. I think there's a lot of parity. There are some very good teams up top, but I think last year was a great battle for the playoffs. Every week we were changing up the standings and everything else. So I think it's gonna come down to that again this year, and then playoffs were great too. some surprise teams in there making runs. So that's what it's all about. It's great.
It is. It's definitely a challenge, like you said, to try and get your head around all 32 teams and rank them. But hey, that's the beautiful thing about rankings is somebody's going to be happy and somebody's going to be upset. So it's the way it is, and it's the life of a ranker, right?
Yeah, I know. And it's like when you look at this stuff, it's like the one thing I learned last year. It's about man minutes, right? Like if you stay healthy and you got guys going, you look at the rankings of where teams finished and total games played and everything. If you were in the top 5, you made the play. Top 10 all made the playoffs. Yep. So if your team could stay healthy, that's what it's all about. And it's about the management and roster management is so important and getting those guys on the ice. So that's what's tough because Duckman's team stays healthy the whole year and they have man minutes out there. They're a playoff team. And I have you at 25th, which is tough.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we're going to be knocking on the door. I don't know if this will be our year, but we're going to try to contend, and then certainly in the next couple of years. But it'll be fun to follow it. It'll be fun to follow the Rangers in that New York area, and we'll definitely reach out again and get you back on the show. Thanks so much. Tell people where they can find all of your work and all of your projects.
Yeah, so you can find my personal account at KHallNY on Twitter. For all New York Ranger updates, I'll throw shots in there. Some of the UFHL guys here and there as well. So keep up with that. You can find me on Belly Up Sports, bellyupsports.com. And then my podcast, the Broadway Hat Podcast, you can find that on Twitter at Broadway Hat Pod. And we have episode number 100 coming out actually tomorrow, Dean.
Congrats.
Yeah, big doing. So episode 100, we have should be Hall of Famer Steve Larmer on the show tomorrow.
There you go.
Gramps is on the show. Great stories from him. A Blackhawks legend, 1994 Stanley Cup champion of the New York Rangers. So, very good show. We had Matthew Barnaby on last week, who is just a ball of energy and electric. So, last 2 good episodes there. But yeah, episode 100. Check us out there. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. But Dean, it was great coming on, and I've been following along the new show here. It's great, and I know you have Jamie coming on later on. Jamie's been a guest on the podcast, actually.
Right on.
So he came on last year after the Andrew Kopp Rangers trade with Winnipeg. So there's a good connection there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, man. Best of luck with it, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You bet. There's Kyle Hall from the Broadway Hat Podcast. I love the rankings. Rankings are the best. Because you're going to piss somebody off. And, that's kind of fun sometimes, especially when you're a talk show host.